Welcome to the Ops Nushke. Today's episode is for operators who have ever sat in planning meeting, looked at the numbers and quietly thought, this math doesn't add up. Most companies believe that they have either a pipeline problem or a productivity problem or hiring problem. But what if the real issue is simpler and more uncomfortable? What if we just don't fully understand the math behind how our own revenue engine works? Because here's what I've learned: revenue rarely breaks because of people aren't working hard enough. It breaks when the underlying math is misunderstood, oversimplified, or politically negotiated. And that's what exactly we are going to unpack today. To do this, I'm joined by someone who has seen planning from multiple vantage points. Suzanne brings over 14 years of experience across B2C and B2B environments in industries like telecom, in software technology, leading up to teams of 30 people and operating inside organizations like HubSpot, Amazon. She has lived the reality of turning demand into revenue, not just forecasting it.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you, Suzanne. Suzanne, can we start with a quick introduction of yourself, and also how did you start with the journey in sales planning?
Yeah, for sure. My journey started 15 years ago or so in marketing operations at T-Mobile USA, where I had the opportunity to work on CRM systems, which was an exciting journey. And then I moved closer to sales ops at T-Mobile as well, because my goal was to move closer to where the customer is. And I think going to our representatives that work with the customers every day is as close as you can go in that corporate environment. And had there the opportunity to work on the systems experience team, offer team, working from individual contributor to first becoming a manager and then a senior manager. And really enjoyed my time there. And that was truly sales operations in terms of go to market when you think about it. And then at Amazon, I had the opportunity to focus more on territory and quota planning. And truth to be told, I did not have background in that. It is something that I had to learn working with organizations within Amazon that had been more mature at their processes and capabilities, working with stakeholders inside, also working with mentors outside the company to really get up to speed on what is it that we're doing, what's the goal, what needs to be done. And now at HubSpot, I have the opportunity and pleasure to work on sales planning for our sales reps.
Wow, what an interesting journey. That must be both scary as well as, rewarding, I guess so, after having exposure to, such dynamic environment. So you have seen planning both at individual contributor level as well as at manager and then strategic level. What's the common mathematical lie companies tell themselves in sales planning?
Yeah, I think the most common pitfall that I can see and I've experienced is to cling to historical data just because it gives us a feeling of comfort and control. It's what we know, it's the trends that we're comfortable with, that we have seen. And what it does, it really limits us to see opportunities. What we should be asking is, knowing this is a trend based on historical data, what needs to be true to change it? And the interesting thing here is that the secondary pitfall is almost on the opposite of the spectrum, which is optimism bias. It's not fear driven, it's more courage driven. Courage with limited or worst case, no data to back it up, or assumptions that were not fully tested and completed. For example, we could say, yes, because of this project, we expect productivity per rep or pipeline to increase by X%, but how confident are we in it? So the solution for both and confirmation bias that I see is experimentation, to see what is possible, but also to see where limitations are. And in the sales planning process, the difficulty with that is while you're in sales planning, the train has left the station. It's too late to experiment and to try new things. So how do companies create space for testing and learning to have proven assumptions, or mostly proven assumptions, to get to the confidence that we as planners need for us, but also for our stakeholders to be confident in the plan? And that doesn't mean that we cannot be bullish on targets. That's how we win, and that's how our companies are moving forward. But we need to have confidence in the plan so that we can relay that to our stakeholders and they believe in it as much as we do.
Wow, what a powerful framework. Historical data as well as over optimism. This basically then tells me that most teams aren't failing execution, they are compounding flawed assumptions. What about missing conversion rates, Suzanne? What do you think about that?
I think it's not as much about misusing conversion rates. I think it's focusing only on conversion rate because conversion rates are inherently an output. They are an outcome of opportunity paired with a great product, sales motion, and talent. And that talent is both on the business development and the sales rep side. It's also sensitive to the economy, as we have seen with COVID tailwinds, where suddenly PPR went up and leads were coming in. And that only lasted for a certain amount of time. Where I'm getting at is that things have to be going right along the whole sales funnel. And we need to plan for the input metrics driving the most value to be confident in the output.
Okay. So instead of optimizing conversion directly, we should be stress testing it, stress testing the inputs that create it. Okay. All right. Interesting. So when you walk into sales plan review, what's the first number you instinctively distrust? Is it win rate assumptions, productivity per rep, or ramp time?
For me, the number that I look at first and that I want to investigate more is productivity per rep. And that is because I have seen productivity per rep being defined differently across different companies, but also across different departments. And there may be a sales view or an FP&A view or different views for a purpose, but the question is when we are talking as a group about productivity per rep, are we using the same math? Are we having the same methodology? Are we trying to measure the same thing? And the other big piece for PPR that I've seen differently used is some look at PPR as an output metric. It's an output of activities, and it's simply MRR created or revenue created divided by headcount. But it's also a matter of looking at it from an input perspective and to say, what is our organic PPR that we're driving? How is PPR changing based on opportunities and based on threats or problems that we may foresee in the market that we cannot control? And having alignment on what we're truly measuring and what we're trying to solve for is what I usually like to do first and get alignment across the groups.
Okay, interesting. Suzanne, do you have, let's say, a North Star definition for productivity per rep, which should be used across the board by, let's say, finance or FP&A, sales ops, sales managers?
Yeah, I think it is the classic revenue or MRR divided by headcount. Now, when you take a look at a time span, you need to make sure that you're looking at average headcount so that you don't, for example, have a situation where you're adding up headcount across the year. The truth is that you're having headcount as an average. That is one. But the first is creating layers in the headcount department where you're saying we have different reps in different tenures across the company. Are they still ramping? Are they fully ramped? And looking at the productivity for these two groups separately, or even creating more subgroups depending on where they are in their journey. And I think that is where we can dive deeper from the standard definition of revenue divided.
Okay, that is actually super insightful. And does this need to differ for, let's say, startup environment versus really mature organizations where, they have 35,000 sellers and have very established processes? Does this have to differ? Does that matter at all?
I think it does matter in terms of sizing. We all know that with statistical modeling, and this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to do with math and systems. First, for speed and efficiency, there is limitations to that as well. When you think at a small market or at a country level, suddenly you may have only 10 reps in that. And 10 reps, there's so many dynamics involved. Where are they in their journey? Is this a high attrition segment? Is this a segment that has a lot going on in terms of environmental or political factors? And the smaller you go, the more inaccurate any statistical model becomes. And the same happens with PPR. I do think it is something, even at smaller companies, you should track for your biggest segments that you have. But just know, yes, with any statistical model, the lower you go, the more erratic the data becomes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So when the math goes wrong, who really feels the impact first time, right? Is it reps, managers, operations, or just a culture, like, culture overall?
Yeah, where it depends, I think, where it happens in planning. When it happens in the planning cycle, I think the pressure is felt first by the teams involved in planning. P&A is one of the big ones, the planning teams are the big ones, and product is another big one there as well, where we say, okay, our assumptions have shifted because of X, Y, and Z, or we knew of a product change or a project change that is impacting what we had planned initially. Then the hustle is happening on the sales planning side when the math is wrong, because we're trying to adjust and correct to get
Hmm.
to a even better outcome so that our sales teams don't feel the outcome. When we do have an impact, or let's say something happens after the plan is closed, and honestly, as soon as the plan is sent, it starts aging already, and then
Hmm.
things can change either internally or externally from the company. But where I'm getting at is when the math is wrong, in that scenario, sales will feel it first. And that can create downstream companies for the downstream problems for the companies. If the plan is too low and there's a lot of opportunities for our reps will be happy about that, right? They're achieving their targets, they're exceeding their targets, they're making good money, and that is a good thing for them. Where this might be more impactful though is budget and OPEX, because how much did we really plan for in terms of expenses from a commission standpoint side? And it maybe covered it, but it may also create tension there. If we are exceeding, for example, our headcount plan, it could be that the span of control widens too much, and suddenly we have too many reps per managers, and now our reps are becoming less productive because the managers are trying to catch up with the amount of people that they have.
Hmm.
On the opposite end, when reps are not attaining, that is also a problem because if they're not making money and if they're not attaining, attrition rises. And that's voluntary attrition for the people who are like, not making my money, I'm out of here, I'm trying to make more money somewhere else. And for those who are not attaining their minimum numbers and are maybe going on performance plans and are leaving the company involuntarily. And where that all leads to is we have high attrition, our tenure mix deteriorates, our PPR deteriorates, and then it is really becoming hard for us to attain the targets that we have set as a company. So both being well above plan or behind plan can both have its own issues, just across different teams and numbers.
Wow, wow. I can't imagine. I think it also creates like the broader problems too, right? Distrust and credibility, which runs in the organization once these type of errors occur,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning of the year itself, because from long-term perspective, then you are relying on that planning done in the initial phase of the year.
Mhm.
And maybe startup organizations don't have that mechanism or processes in place to fix the problem in the middle of the year, go to dynamic plans. Okay, so what's one metric leaders think they understand, but in your opinion, almost always misuse in planning conversations?
I think one of the metrics that, again, I'm not sure if I would use the term misuse, but the hyper focus is, of course, on revenue. That's the output
Hmm.
that we are creating. And I think there is sometimes especially in the last miles of planning, even in Europe, we just talked about what if something doesn't go right in the plan. And there's suddenly a focus on, okay, we need to move the target somewhere else. Somewhere else could be between sales organizations, going from the rep sales organization to the business development representatives, for example. Does it go to CS, or does it go to a different country, to a different geo? Does it go to a different segment? There are so many variables that can play there. And I think the perception is often that we move target around and then the
Mm-hmm.
plan will be more balanced. And I'm coming back to the input metrics and the importance of those, because they will determine where your output goes. And you need to really closely inspect those inputs to create a plan that has longevity, that is accurate in the long run. You can shift revenue at short notice. Sure, that will stop the bleeding or it will stop the problem momentarily, but it's not going to address the symptom. The question was, what is the symptom? Is it an economic factor? And we say, we need to divest from this country into that country? Or is it a internal factor of high attrition? Is that high attrition because of attainment? Is it because of compensation? And that is where you then can make informed decisions about what the change will be and then steer the plan accordingly to become whole.
All right. So, Suzanne, if you had to break scalable sales planning into three core math layers, because we have been talking about how sales planning is actually a math, what would those core layers be? Math layers would be. Can you outline it for us and give our audience an understanding of what those layers would be?
The first layer with any metric, and that could be revenue or that could be capacity, is your baseline. What's our run rate? And for that, historical data can be helpful. In the first question that we had talked about, what are misconceptions or pitfalls? That is one, but you can also not neglect it at the same time. So take a look at what your baseline is and have your trends changed up or down. The second layer for me is calculating in the risks and opportunities into the plan to say, from our baseline, are we expecting an up or are we expecting a down? Or are we expecting things to be pretty much stagnant? And if we have a gap to the top line at the end, and that's step number 3, how do we solve it? So for example, if we play this through with PPR, we can say, what's our productivity per rep right now in this country and segment, and has it, based on 3-year data or whatever horizon that we want to take a look at, improved or has it actually decelerated? Then we know what we can expect in terms of the PPR curve for next year. We can drag it forward, if you will. Then you layer on top, for example, programs or projects that are increasing PPR. Are we doing a price change that will inherently increase productivity per rep because the product becomes more expensive? Are we adding products and we're selling more? Are we expanding into a new market? And that is, for example, why we're expanding more. Or do we have risk in the market? And I'm going back to the attrition example, where we maybe want to anticipate deceleration in terms of productivity per rep because of that. And then at the end, what's the gap to the top line revenue that we need, and how do we solve for that? You can also play that through with capacity. Does your headcount end at the end of the year? And what's your requirement for growth that often FP&A gives out to the sales planning teams to say, what's your average year-over-year growth rate? And from there, same, what are the risks and opportunities for headcount? Are there new headcount roles that we need to develop, like overlay roles to make sales even more productive? Are there roles that are not working today and we need to scale back on them? Are there markets where we're struggling with hiring, for example, where we need to adjust? And then again, what's the gap to the headcount plan that we have set for the next year, and how do we solve for that? So these 3 core layers I just used with 2 examples to show you. To me, they apply evergreen, and I think you can apply them to many metrics, and that's how I would break them down for a sales plan.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for making it so simple. I mean, personally, as a, let's say, anyone who's, let's say, a junior sales ops person probably would understand these 3 layers and know where to start. So I appreciate how you simplified this concept for our audience. Let's transition to more of a capacity discussion now. So one of the persistent assumption in planning is if we hire more reps, we are going to generate more revenue. But headcount is truly not capacity, right? And capacity is also not productivity. So walk us through how companies incorrectly model rep capacity. Um, yeah, and how do models break if the capacity is not done correctly?
Yeah, I think there's in sales planning, there's always several areas where things could go wrong, unfortunately. And it's good to know, once you know them, you will definitely not forget about them, not make those mistakes again. But I do think there's a presumption of going back to the headcount. If we're at capacity, then we can always meet target. And that is a assumption that could be wrong from the get-go. And here's why. When you think of your headcount plan and you're adding reps to that to next year, those reps will not be at their own full capacity. They may get first existing customers signed, and maybe then they get prospects assigned. They have probably a ramping factor of their where their quota is reduced for the first couple of months, so that they're starting to learn the products, learn the company, gain momentum, and to build those up. So while their capacity in terms of accounts and customers is building, their skills are building, and you cannot count them as a full-time, fully ramped, fully productive rep. So you need to make sure
Right.
in your plan that you include factors such as anything that would reduce your full quota. And ramping is an example that we mentioned. We mentioned capacity is one thing. Leave of absence is one. Quota leave is one. You could also look at in the previous year, how often did we run incentives to get to our top line number? And if we were not to run the same incentives this year, what would that make in terms of the top line that we need to get to? So I think one of the big misconceptions or pitfalls is that there's a lot of confidence that the quota roll up equals the top line revenue that's needed, and that's not the case.
Wow. There are several attributes that affect this. That's interesting. So, a follow-up to that is actually, do organizations assume every rep becomes average? Should they ignore the performance variability altogether, or should they be, or do they overestimate actual selling time or underestimate managerial load?
Yeah, there's a lot in there to factor in. I think one of the things is that the math would be simple if we said one headcount equals X amount of revenue. But we do know, especially now in the age of AI, that cannot be true. We need to have a bent curve or curved growth instead of a linear growth to say one rep needs to do 1.5x in revenue, whereas before they did one rep is 1x in revenue. So I think that's one that is part of the model. I do think also that we as planners can introduce complexities as part of the company. Here's what I mean with that. When the new plan year starts, everyone is excited. People learn about if their OTEs are changing, and of course, hopefully they're going up. They learn about their quotas, they learn about new products, they learn about the plan for the year. And that can be very overwhelming for the reps. So in addition to all the known factors or modelable factors such as RAMs or potentially even leave of absence, though that is harder to model because that changes based on the population and also attainment. But it is truly a more complex approach of how much mind share are we taking away from the rep that they could spend on with their customers, that they could spend on creating pipeline, reviewing their accounts. And I think one of the things that is underestimated in terms of complexity is how much companies can interrupt the rep's sales motion by adding too much on their plate, too many administrative things. Read these 5 emails, and this emails we explain to your quotas, and this email we explain to you this. Too much at once, and I think that mind share and then shifting the mindset between tasks is, I think, underestimated at times.
Wow. I also, one of the guests on the podcast who was talking about enablement, she also mentioned Amy McLean. She also mentioned something about, being mindful of how much our sales team is getting bombarded with internal processes and mechanism. And you have also highlighted this. I think this probably happens without really thinking it through in most cases, and the impact of that is actually could be so severe in the long run. So we definitely need to be mindful what we are putting in process and how we are communicating it to our salespeople at what interval.
Absolutely.
So Suzanne, one thing that comes to my mind, or one question that comes to my mind, is like, let's say if a rep works for 40 hours a week, how many hours are truly revenue generating?
Yeah, that is a great question. My first sentence or my first answer would here be not as many as the rep or company would want. And I've
Hmm.
read recently that a SaaS rep, like a rep in the SaaS industry, has only about 15 to 20 productive hours. And that is per week. So around 40% of their time is spent
Hmm.
on true revenue generating tasks. That could be meeting with customers, that could be closing deals, like working with legal, like for example, on the contract. And by the way, I should also mention that data, I think, was a combination of like Glassdoor and Sepster. So I want to put recognition is deal.
Uh-huh.
But every company that I've worked with, sales said, we need more time to do sales focusing tasks. And enablement, like you just mentioned from the other guest, Amy, is one of the things that plays into it. Communication is another place that plays into it. And it's about, can we as a company pause and say, define what do we define as real selling time? To me, it's the hours spent with current customers or with qualified prospects. Ideally, we give to our reps qualified prospects and not have them hunting for those at the same time. Hours that they spend on closing a deal, for example, they're working with product or legal to meet the customer's needs, to get that deal over the line. And I also think, though, that training and on products and sales motion plays into that, because the better we know our products and we can determine the customer fit and what is right for our customers, because we always want to work back from them, that will help with the close rates for the pipeline as well. Anything that doesn't fall into these three buckets, I would almost say is probably noise. And for RevOps as a strategic organization, they are responsible to help identify and minimize the noise. Is the noise coming from territory planning? Is the noise coming from segmentation? Is the noise coming from the communication department? Is it from enablement? Is it from, it could not only be the reps, it could be, how are the managers feeling that are supporting reps? Do they have what they need to be successful at their job so they can help our reps to be productive? And I think that is something where this has an opportunity to be fleshed out outside of the planning cycle, because to me, this is something that's evergreen, like continuously reducing the noise for our sales teams so that they can focus on what matters most.
I was going to ask you, Suzanne, like, do you have any process where you actually take feedback from your reps or, sellers for the last year planning strengths and weaknesses, or, what worked in last year planning and what didn't before you actually start planning for this year? Is there any, insight you can provide to our audience on that?
Absolutely. I think there's in planning and after planning where you have opportunities for feedback and checking in. And I think as a sales planner, it can be hard because in planning, you're getting a lot of information from product, from the C-suite, from people ops, from legal. Like, you're trying to build your plan with everyone in the company, basically. And sales is one of your most important stakeholders as that part as well. And it can sometimes feel as times of disruptive, and it's not disruptive because itself by itself is disruptive. It's just because it's so many things are happening. The way I see it, and I think I will look it up, but there was also a newsletter recently that talked about this, is as long as communication and feedback is happening, that is good. And you may not like what people are saying, or you maybe do. It doesn't matter, because as long as someone is communicating to you and providing feedback to you, that is valuable, and you need to take that. And in planning, what it comes to that is with sales leaders, I like to include them in the sales plan. And I like to
Can you
include them in
repeat
the
that?
sales plan. And the reason for that is they are our gateway to the sales directors, to the sales managers, and to the reps to help being advocates for the plan that is to happen. Again, there's things that are in our control, but there's things that are not in our control. Let's say one sales leader says, hey, I need X amount more sales managers per year to be successful. Well, it could be that from a finance side, we can not afford that. So then the question is, what trade-offs can we do? And it all comes back to, and I'm rambling around this, about the partnership and the trust that you build by having frequent check-ins with them directly and keeping them informed. How is the plan made? You want to demystify what's going into it. If you are, and I'm saying this because in my earlier planning years, I've seen instances where we created an iteration of the sales plan, and usually there's 3 or 4 in a planning cycle. And you give someone the first iteration, and there's so many questions because they weren't part of the journey, and you're catching them cold, and they see the numbers and are reacting to it, and they don't know from that number, does it make sense? Does it gut check? If you bring them along the journey throughout the planning cycle, you will be much more successful in buy-in, helping cascade to their team members, but also understanding of there's things that we can control and there's things that we can't control. And one of the things that's always will be true, that all companies are striving for growth, and every year they want to grow more. So that is not going away. So the question is, how do we work together to get to that? So that was a long-winded answer for in the planning cycle. And we also like to take along the local sales operations team. Like, my team is a centralized sales planning team, and we want to bring in the sales operations leaders globally into that journey. And then after that, yes, there's a big opportunity for sitting down and doing a retrospective into sales planning with your stakeholders there, but also with your other stakeholders that you have worked with. And it's also always easy to forget about them, your technical teams.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you use a technical tool for Anaplan. We use Anaplan at our job. It's also important to ask them, how did this go for you? Did we have a lot of ad hoc requests for you to create the sales plan that we put band-aids on, but now we need to make this a true capability? And then maybe it's because in my earlier years before sales planning, I was more on the technical side, but I do see that when the chapter of planning closes, we're often moving forward to say, what do we need to do in the next planning cycle from a methodology standpoint? But we also cannot forget about the technical standpoint.
Okay. Wow. Beautifully answered question. Thank you so much for going deeper into this because feedback is crucial. And I think at the end of the day, even sales team crave for structure or, somebody to teach them or provide them that knowledge. So super helpful. Susan, we often hear, once we hire a new rep, there's probably about 30, 60, 90 days. So that three 3 months ramp up time, right? But in my experience also, and I'm sure you have seen it too, we know that this experience or this ramp up time is never linear. It depends upon seller's background, experience in the industry, and so many different things. How complex your own environment is, products are. So all of that, right? So
Mhm.
how should an operator think about ramp mathematically? Do you actually model confidence curves or managers like leverage ratios? How do you basically do it mathematically?
Yeah. The mathematical approach I like to go with here is also the productivity per rep because you
Okay.
can see what, at least historically, the productivity was. And you can say, what's my learning bucket? If we say we are ramping someone for 90 days, then you can say, okay, what does PPR look like for month 1 to 3, and then for maybe 4 to 6? And you can bucket these and see where they are. I think that is one important step, recognizing what stages a rep is in from when they joined to when they graduate. And I think that graduation is often also when are they fully ramped? And to your point, it's not linear. If you have a segment that is highly plagued by a product challenge that was not created by the company, but that was created by, for example, a market circumstance, that PPR is a symptom of something else that's going on. It may not have anything to do with the talent. But if you see a segment that has usually been highly profitable and suddenly you see a dip in productivity, is it because did we grow too strong, for example? And did we hire too many people at once and we could not ramp them effectively from an enablement standpoint, from a manager to rep ratio standpoint? That could be going wrong. Going back though to the when is a rep fully ramped, to me, what I like to do is for every rep that is off ramp, I like to run an analysis that shows the bell curve of where the reps are falling in attainment. And in the SaaS industry, could be outdated data, but the last thing that I heard was companies target between 50 to 60% of reps attaining their target at 100%. It's also called participation rate. And to
Okay.
me, when most people that started in a certain cohort fall into the participation rate of their off-ramp peers, that's when I would consider them graduated or fully ramped. Can also vary by segment. We know in the enterprise segment, the cycles are much longer and ramping may be much longer. Important there as well to take a look at the dynamics of each segment,
Mm-hmm.
internal and external, to say what is a successful participation rate, particularly for this segment. And then are we measuring actively against how our hiring cohorts are performing against those participation rates?
All right. Okay. Interesting. What happens culturally when capacity math is wrong, though?
Yeah,
Burnout, attrition, sandbagging.
yeah. I think the company usually sets a target and leaders are pushing for growth, right? And that's their job. Every company needs to grow and we want more revenue, and we want more revenue more than headcount, in the sense of we don't want linear growth. We want that curved growth that I have been talking about. And what happens culturally when the math is wrong is usually when there's not enough opportunity per rep that's available. And that could be, well, actually, that's a symptom of the capacity plan, that where the math went wrong somewhere along the way. So when there's not enough opportunity for reps to capitalize on, reasons could be maybe the segmentation data that we had is incorrect. Maybe the enrichment data is not working as we expected it to be. Maybe there's a country that is impacted by economic challenges that couldn't have been factored into the sales plan to begin with. Regardless of the reason, if there's more opportunity per rep, then the reps again are very happy because attainment comes easy. They're making their numbers. In the inverse scenario, the attainment drops, and attainment is a key factor for job satisfaction, especially in the sales role, because that impacts their take-home pay. And when reps cannot make their pay, then attrition goes up. And I had mentioned earlier that could be both in the voluntary and in the involuntary segment. And each attrition point translates into millions of MRR lost and tens of thousands in additional hiring costs, let alone that it also impacts leave of absences, because maybe people are burned out from the stress that they experience of not attaining their targets, or from the fear that they may have to go on a performance plan. And when I think about that, is every company usually have de-risking mechanisms in place each year when they do that, because that can happen whether the math was wrong, whether there's an outside factor that we haven't thought of. Such mechanisms can include we slow down hiring in areas where opportunities are low, or we drive marketing initiatives to drive more leads or more opportunity, or we could be accelerating hiring in other areas. When speaking of hiring, I think one of the important things that is not overlooked, but people are looking at often too late in sales planning, is that how important it is to know that talent acquisition recruiting can flex, but they cannot perform miracles. If you are moving headcount or allocation, recruiting, they also have capacity, right? It's not only sales capacity, it's also recruiting capacity. And that has to shift, which means a recruiting team may go from supporting a small business segment to a corporate segment. Maybe they need additional training. Maybe they need to hire additional recruiters, and they could be internal headcount. They could be contractors, and those need to be trained, build pipeline. That is the aspect of the recruiting engine. It's like a ship. It's really, really hard to accelerate them. And once they're running, it's incredibly hard to stop them. So let's say you want to slow down hiring in a market. You will have situations where prospect reps are actively in interviews. Maybe they're in the last stages of their interviews, and you cannot not hire them, or at least it would not be a very good move in terms of candidate experience to do that. All to say, long story short, when we shift the plans to mitigate risks or to enhance opportunities, we need to make sure that we think through all of the downstream teams that could be impacted by that. And one of the teams that I see having a delayed, hey, this is what is happening, let's plan for it together, recruiting or talent acquisition.
Oh, wow. You covered this answer across the board, like, all 360-degree. I appreciate that details. Suzanne, let's say we are talking to a entry-level sales operations leader and you're teaching them how to build a capacity model from scratch. What would be those 5 inputs that you would focus on or ask them to include? These are basically must include inputs they need to have in their capacity model.
Yeah, I think first, for everyone who's starting their journey in sales planning or is interested in it, I want to say that if you look at job statistics, even right now, where the job market feels colder than usually, definitely nothing that has to do with the 2022 highs a couple of years ago, sales planning roles are always available and open. So RevOps often offers great career paths for people. And it's something to, if you haven't thought about it, I think it's something to really think about if this could be a path for you. Not to say that it's an easy job, but it's a very, there's no other job where you learn as much about the companies and the puts and takes as in a role like that. Going back to the 5 inputs though, is if I were to teach a junior sales ops person, like, hey, here's the 5 things you need to think about, is your headcount baseline. What's in your headcount? Where are they? What roles? How have they been growing in the past? Attainment paired with attrition. Opportunity per rep. Talked about that in the previous example of what that does when it's right and what does it do when it's wrong. And OPEX per rep, because you also want to make sure that you keep your plan whole, not only from a revenue side, but also from a expenditure side. And then for SaaS companies, LTV to CAC. If that's something that you're new in RevOps or sales planning, or you're new to the SaaS industry, I think this is one of the first things that you should look up and learn.
Okay. Wow. I want to understand a little bit more about LTV to CAC, right? That's the ratio. We at our company, we are trying to implement this. We haven't yet implemented it. I'm sure there would be companies like us where, this is not available. If this is not available, is there any other input or other metric which could help us give the same insights?
That is a good one. I think
Lifetime value, yeah, lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, right?
right. I think you still would want to know what customer acquisition costs you have. I don't think you can get around that. I think that you have, or at least you can approximate that. But for the lifetime value, I think that can be harder to do depending on what you're looking at in terms of the segments, in terms of the accounts that you have. But you could say, what is my usual 3-year, 5-year revenue that I'm creating from a
Okay.
customer? So you could go with that. Though I do think that creating a lifetime value all depends on that you're agreeing on what the definition is. I think, and it has to be a dollar value, and it has to be something that you can measure. You always want to measure the costs against the cost, well, the revenue that you're generating versus the cost that you are delivering. And lifetime is different. I've seen different companies do it different ways. Sometimes it's, if you are a contract-based company, a customer stays with you for 24 months. Great. Then your customer lifetime value is what they usually spend with you or generate with you for those 24 months. It could be that you don't have a subscription model, and then you need to say, okay, how long do customers usually stay with us when they're coming from this industry, when they're coming from this segment? Difficult to do, but yeah, can be done for sure.
Okay. I'm thinking about possible alternatives. What you mentioned is helpful because, we have both SaaS as well as project-based revenue coming from similar accounts as well or similar customers, right? So it could be a combination of
Correct.
that taken over a couple of years time frame. All right. Is it ever, Suzanne, is it ever to plan assuming 100% of quota attainment across the team?
That's another great question. I do think that it's necessary for a company usually to over-assign or over-allocate target. This is because capacity or quota attainment is hard to get consistently to 100%. You can maybe as a company get to it, but when you go down to the smaller regions and segments, it will become less predictable and harder to do. That's where the participation rate that I had talked earlier about of the 50 to 60% comes in. And sometimes, and that also means sometimes reps are making more, sometimes reps are making less. And you have to factor in vacation, leave of absence, hiring delays, attrition. All of that can create a gap. So I do think you should work backwards from a participation target rather than saying everyone attains at 100%.
Okay. So it's very risky to assume that it is 100%,
Correct.
right? Okay. All right. All right. So what we are learning is that capacity defines possibility, but conversion defines reality. So let's reverse engineer this revenue engine a little bit. Because revenue is not one number and it's a chain of probabilities, and each link introduces fragility, right? So when you deconstruct a revenue plan backwards, where does the math usually start breaking? Is it stage conversion assumptions or something else?
Often breaks, and I think I mentioned this before in our conversation already, is that segments could be too small, or they will be segments that are too small for statistical mass. And that's a known first breaking point. I also think about the deal closed rates that we talked about earlier. They are incredibly dependent on sales motion, talent, product, and macroeconomic going right. And we may want to look more at the inputs. So when we deconstruct a sales plan, it comes back to me, what are the outputs that we want to drive? What are all the inputs that are drivers? And all of the several inputs that you could have. You could have hundreds of inputs. Which ones are the ones that have the highest conversion to our output at the end? It's also called KPI driver tree analysis. At least that's how I remember it being called many, many years ago. And I think it's really breaking down what are the key things that we can influence. Some of them will be more costly, some of these will be more cost efficient, but you can then decide where can we dial up or down to get to our output.
Okay. How about pipeline coverage, ACV inflation? None of those matter?
I do think that they matter, especially when you think, and then the stage conversion for me is input driven. So you have leads that are coming in. How many leads are coming in? Are they qualified leads? Meaning, do we know who to talk to? Are we talking to the right person? Is there opportunity that comes with it in terms of how strong is the interest? How much revenue does a company have behind them? Then that lead goes to a rep. How strong is the rep really at having the conversation? And do they have everything that they need to meet the customer's needs and give them the confidence to buy the product? And that all leads then to the output. So I do think that the funnel process to get, and that has, the funnel itself has multiple conversion points, right? It could be a marketing lead, and then we qualify them, and then they're becoming marketing qualified. That's the first conversion rate. But then converting them from a marketing lead to a sales lead, meaning we're handing them over to a sales rep, and the sales rep is like, yep, that makes sense. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to prioritize this lead. That's another conversion point. So you do definitely need to work along the stages of the funnel, and starting with the top of funnel, what's coming in. And for that, though, you need to have clear priorities as a company, as what are we expecting to have the highest output. So we give that to reps. And how do we make it so that it's easy for the reps to know how to prioritize the leads and which ones to chase after? What you don't want to do is handing over leads to reps and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. This is not even the person that can make decisions at the company. So now they're going and they're searching for their own contact. And we spoke earlier about productive hours versus non-productive hours.
Right. Yeah.
Them chasing or correcting data is one of the things that is well spent. They need to do it maybe to get to what they need to be, but it's something that they shouldn't have to spend time on.
Okay, makes sense. Susan, as we work in multi-segment or multi-size environment, what's more dangerous? Is it, like because win rates, sales cycle might differ. So what's more dangerous? Overestimating win rates or underestimating sales cycle length?
My gut would have initially said that overestimating win rates seems like the obvious choice because we know that closing deals is directly linked to revenue. So that makes sense to go with that. And I think that's what I'm going here. At the same time, we need to monitor the deal cycle length because that's a real risk that creeps in over time. It's not something as drastic as where you see swings in the economy and we see a push in contracts or sales, or we see a deceleration in it. The sales cycle length can creep in much more over time. Maybe you see it over 9 months, over 12 months, and suddenly it's too late for you to act. And it's not too late. It's never too late to act, I should say. But where you are like, oh, if we had seen this or if we had anticipated this 6 months ago, we could have changed the sales motion then to mitigate the risk that is coming.
Oh, wow. Okay, I have a next question about conversion volatility as well. So, how should operators mathematically account for conversion volatility year over year? Do you regress to the mean? Do you do scenario models? Or do you do you use weight historical or forward signals?
And I think all of the above can be the right answers. When you think of year over year, there's so many things that can change. So you would want to have a bear versus bull case. You would want to have a baseline case. But you would also want to play with, if you are creating these, are you using a weighted 6 months average? How does it look like with a weighted 9-month average? And if you run this through the engine, and this is where AI is actually also coming in incredibly helpful to do these calculations very, very quickly, is which out of these models do we have the most confidence in? So I think you need to experiment and play. This comes where I think in the very beginning of our conversation, I had talked about how important experimentation is. And I think this is one of the times where it's very well spent to take a look at experimentation.
Got it. Okay. Now, during the year, when we are closing deals and adding new pipeline, when leadership says we just need 10% more pipeline, what math are they actually ignoring? Is it stage velocity, capacity constraints, or simply deal complexity?
Yeah, pipeline is one thing. For
Hmm?
me, it's always about, is it qualified pipeline? Because that's where the money is.
Yeah.
Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
putting out more marketing dollars to get more leads, but the leads are not being converted, then we just wasted money on the marketing side. So I think it's what in the marketing and sales cycle are more
Mm-hmm.
likely to create those qualified leads that our sales reps want to work and can work successfully. And the follow-ups here also need to be, do we have capacity to work the leads when they come in? So you say, yes, you want more pipeline. Do we have enough headcount in that segment where you
Mm-hmm.
want to have the 10% more pipeline to actually work it? Because what you don't want to have is customers are responding to whatever campaign that you're running, and then you have no one following up. And that's the
Hmm.
first impression of the company as well. So it's truly coming back to making sure you're thinking it through across the marketing and the sales cycles to say what needs to be true for us
Mm-hmm.
to gain that qualified pipeline, but also to serve that qualified.
Got it. So qualified pipeline and capacity to help with that pipeline, to convert that pipeline is what you're highlighting here. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Since we've been talking about math, I'm curious to know if we had to write real revenue equation on a whiteboard right now, what are the non-negotiable variables from your end? Can you give us some structure with some variables like, put in an equation?
Yeah, for sure. For me, the equation starts with what's your headcount? What's
Mm-hmm.
the baseline productivity for that headcount? What are the productivity levers that we're anticipating? And when I say levers, they could be up or down. What are our opportunities and what are our risks when it comes to productivity? And that equates to what is the new revenue that we can expect. When you say we are adding 5 headcount and they're creating $1,000 in additional, okay, now you have $50,000, but with the productivity levers, we actually expect 40,000 or maybe even 60,000. Then you get closer to your revenue plan.
Okay. So if I were to say this in equation terms, headcount plus baseline productivity plus productivity levers is equal to revenue?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. That's the equation, guys. That's what Suzanne is giving us as a revenue equation, non-negotiable revenue equation. I'm sorry. Non-negotiable revenue equation. All right. Let's move on to the next segment, Suzanne, on annual sales plan. Why annual sales plan might be broken. Do you think that annual sales plan, first of all, to start with this segment, do you think that annual sales planning itself is now a fundamentally outdated concept?
It's a valid question because the truth is that as soon as the sales plan is locked, it is locked based on assumptions and data at that specific point in time that you try
Mm-hmm.
to forecast or to plan for with all the data and information that you had available at that point, plus probably a little bit of confidence to say, are we getting with this? And once that point in time has passed, the plan starts aging, and changes in the business or the macroeconomic environment can cause changes regardless of how solid the plan was once. Now, I know that COVID is an extreme example that was unprecedented, well, not unprecedented, but it was one of those things that who could have thought this was going to happen? No
Mm-hmm.
sales plan was ready for it. It will not be as extreme as that, but you will always have surprises where you're like, oh, I did not expect X, Y, and Z to happen. A couple of years ago, for example, when the Queen of England died, the offices were closed for a couple of days. Did we account for that in the seasonality plan? Well, it's an event that you cannot account for in your seasonality plan of now you have potentially
Right.
reps that are on holiday more days in a month that you had anticipated. And you will always have these at smaller and medium scale. So where I'm getting that is what is important is, yes, you have the annual sales plan, and we should always do that because you need to know where your North Star is for the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. To me, that's non-negotiable because the target sets the reality. There's something as when you give someone a target, people are marching towards it. So you need to
Right.
put something out there, but you also need to put mechanisms in place to adjust. And I think what that means is I have heard some people talk about it as ever planning or consistent planning, whatever you want to call it. But you should have mechanisms in your plan that allow you to adjust your plan on a quarterly basis. You have looked at
Mm-hmm.
things for 2.5 months, and your data indicates, yeah, you may have a serious opportunity here that you didn't see, and you want to get that opportunity. And maybe you want to change quotas to do that. Maybe you are saying like, oh, we have a problem with recruiting capacity right now in this, and it will take longer to recover. Should we move headcount for the next quarter somewhere else to do that? Doesn't matter which element of the plan it is, but I think to the core elements of the plan, which are headcount and revenue, you should allow a quarterly review cycle where you can then adjust for the rest of the year, because maybe those 3 months have given you a continuous trend and that's how it will proceed for the rest of the year. It could also simply
Mm-hmm.
be that 2 months or 3 months of data could not be a trend, could be
Mm-hmm.
a fluke, right? I mean, every moment in time is just like a blip, and you will have to change it the quarter after it. I think where I'm getting it with this, there's truth to, yes, the plan is aging, and yes, put mechanisms in place to allow those to be updated. But make sure you set those expectations with the teams that you're working with, so it's not coming to anyone as a surprise that things could be moving around throughout the year.
Okay. So here's the next follow-up question on that, like comparing accuracy to adaptability. Is high forecast accuracy actually the right goal in that case, or should we optimize basically responsiveness instead? Should we say 95% accuracy is realistic, or it has to be optimized for responsiveness?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards the latter, but I'm also going to speak out of both sides of my mouth to say both are equally important. If someone
Mm-hmm.
told me that I created the perfect sales plan, I'd probably smile and start laughing, because nothing is perfect. And so is
Mm-hmm.
no sales plan. I'd like to think more of it in terms of consistency and sustainable growth and the flexibility to pivot. Did we create a plan that is challenging yet achievable and believable? Are we confident that we have the right place lined up to get to our revenue target? And what are the plays that we need to initiate or run when things are not going as planned? Of course,
Mm-hmm.
accuracy matters, because we talked earlier about what happens when the plan is not accurate and what that can do to all the teams in a company. And it's something that as sales planners, we of course watch closely every month so that we can be ready to tweak. I think that not trying to chase, a plan will not be perfect. So be able to respond to it, try to foresee what can happen, where can things go wrong. What were your assumptions that were the hardest to model? What were your
Mm-hmm.
assumptions that were like, they're not fully baked, or were you like, yeah, there's more confidence than math behind it? Try to have those mitigation players or plays in place before the plan is rolled out, so that you can react accordingly.
I think, Susan, all along, one key message that I'm hearing, at least from, our discussion, is that balance what you're adding to your sales plan. Be flexible, but balance what you add to your sales plan so that it doesn't become, too noisy,
Yes.
or it doesn't become uh, too, let's say, inflexible to, changing requirements of the business or just the environment around you, right?
Yeah, and I think
So
the second,
that's,
it's a responsiveness, and where the accuracy comes in though is trust. Let's say you just built the sales plan and it's December and everyone is now watching what's happening in January, what's happening in March,
hmm,
what's happening in
hmm,
April. Are we meeting our plan? And if the answer in January is nope, or in February is nope, and how you start the year with the plan is very important, because I do think there is a lot of what it does in terms of confidence from the sales teams, from the company, for the stakeholders, and that may set the tone for the rest of the year. I think that mind component could be underestimated there as well, how much it can impact people's confidence and reactions to it. Yeah.
I'm tempted to ask this question as, you know, quarter end is coming for many of us, March ending, right? And what if we are not at our target right now? Maybe we are
Mm.
far, or either maybe what actions would you recommend sales operators to take to, review their plan right now?
Yeah. I would start with I mean, if you're behind for the whole quarter, I would start with a tops to bottom inspection of the plan. First, I would
Mm-hmm.
try to find out, is it something I can localize? Is it happening in one region and it's not happening in the other regions? Is it happening in most regions? I think that will help you to say, is it a local or is it a global
Mm-hmm.
opportunity or problem? The second is in those markets or regions that you've identified, what is the problem? Is it pipeline? Is it headcount? Is it attainment? Is it leads? For example, could we say we had X amount of leads in the plan, but we are not performing to plan with our leads? Well, then I need to go and talk to marketing planning to say, what are you expecting for the rest of the year? Do we need to shift something? Is it a fluke? The SEO capability, like the search engine optimization capabilities changed that may have impacted leads. So going back to it, yeah, I would say it needs a thorough inspection of the plan, unless you can say you have a very external event happening like COVID and it's a no-brainer that that is happening, but you would want to investigate what the issue is, because I think it's hard after a quarter. You can still make up for the rest of the year. It's not like one quarter is gone and it's lost. But it's true when I think of our sales teams, where's the motivation? Like, are they motivated? Are they motivated to continue? Maybe that's the time where we need to think about incentives as well. Do we do incentives to help gain momentum, getting them back to their pay if they haven't attained in quarters, so that we can curb attrition before it happens? Because attrition usually, from what I've seen, is the seasonality in Q2 increases. And I've seen that across industries. I've seen that across regions. It's interesting. And it may have to do with the year ends. People get their incentives paid out and then they start looking for something else. That could be one factor. Regardless of what I'm saying with it is your attrition risk goes up even more, knowing that there's a seasonal aspect to it. And if you had a Q1 that didn't go so well. So you want to make sure you protect your capacity.
Wow, super insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Suzanne, have you ever had to defend your math-based decision that was not, let's say, politically convenient?
I'm not sure if politically convenient, because it always is in the eyes of the beholder. The one that I've consistently, I wouldn't say be challenged with, but the one thing that where people have asked me, are you sure we cannot do better, is attrition. And attrition is incredibly difficult to plan. Now, once you have your targets and you can forecast attainment, then you can say, yep, we expect X amount of people to have this attainment. We know how many would be on a PIP. We also know probably historically how many people have been on a PIP and if they're making the PIP or if they're not making the PIP. But what you cannot forecast is voluntary attrition. If we had the job market to open up as it did in Q2 and Q3 2022, where people were hopping between companies at scale, it's something that you cannot forecast at this scale. Or you can forecast, yes, plan, not so much, depending on how far you're planning ahead. And where I'm getting with that is that I do think when it comes to attrition is, I've gotten the question before of like, hey, can it be lower? And the answer was, on my end, based on the data that I have, based on the assumptions that I have, this is what the number is. However, let's talk about what needs to be true. Do we have programs in place that will help with enablement? Are we changing our new hire ramps? Are we having incentives? And what is the incentive structure for reps the next years? Are we increasing OTEs, for example? I think any metric, even if it's challenged, can be up for debate once we are starting asking what does need to be true. And it could be we need to have attrition be at X% to get to Y% of revenue. That could be. But it could also be, what are the levers that we as a company can pull to change the trajectory? What I'm getting at is, in the beginning, I had talked about there could be history bias to data. Maybe because I work in capacity planning, I even have a history bias to say, well, attrition has always been X%, so that is always in the back of my mind, forecasting or in planning with that in mind. And it's good to be challenged, especially when you had many years in sales planning, to say, is there a bias coming from the data that you know so well? Or are we, because of that, not looking at what could be true?
Wow, interesting. Suzanne, if you had to replace annual planning with any, let's say, resilience system, what would it look like?
Can you repeat that question? If I could replace what in the planning process?
So if you had to replace annual planning with a more resilient system, let's say quarterly rebaselining or dynamic capacity recalibration. I think we touched base a little bit of that earlier as well, but what would be that more resilient system?
I think going to a quarterly rolling plan would be more resilient than an annual plan with quarterly touch ups. Now, the question is, where does the capacity of the planning team lie to do that? Traditional planning teams, they are deep in the planning phase for like 6 months and they're coming out of it in January or February. And then they're needing to look at, okay, for the next year, what needs to change? What new products are launching? I think there could be that perception of planning only happens for like 5, 6 months of the year and the rest, I don't know what people think we're doing, but we are after planning is right before planning. And just because
Mhm.
the kickoff isn't happening until August or July or whenever it is for a company, you are planning for it as soon as you drop the pen on your previous plan. And that allows us to get better at methodologies, processes, technologies, right? I talked a little bit about, are our systems ready? Do we need to change something? Can we use AI differently to model capacity? Can we make our teams more efficient with doing that? But if there is capacity on the team, I think going to a rolling quarterly is
Mm,
more resilient than the
okay.
annual with the touch ups.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful to know. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about AI because, everyone claims that it's gonna fix things in planning, quota setting, and many other core functions of sales ops. So, do you think AI is actually here to fix sales planning, or it is simply to accelerate, let's say, bad math?
Yeah, definitely yes on the accelerating math. When AI came out first, I was very fascinated by it and I was able to run sensitivity analyses of if attainment drops by X%, how much attrition will that be? How much MRR will that be in MRR that we're missing? Like those correlation analyses, AI was able to do much faster than I could have in Excel or a G Sheet. So definitely yes to accelerating the math. Though the risk with that is you need to know your data well to see if the output is actually accurate. And at some point, I think there will be better alert mechanisms or check mechanisms in place. Or, of course, you can tell the tool that you're using, like, hey, check for X, Y, and Z to uncover any miscalculations or math calculations. I just know from when I started to use it initially, there was a lot of more inspection that I had to do to say, okay, yes, we're going down the right track, but this is 30 degrees in the direction that I didn't want to go. So let's steer it a little bit in the other way. And lots of opportunity there. And I think it can also help us with a more pre-warning system or less hands-on pre-warning system to say, if these metrics usually indicate an opportunity or risk to the plan, can it run consistently and tell me as soon as when that happens so that we're not in a place of, we had the example earlier where you had mentioned, what if a company didn't make their Q1 plan? Well, I mean, we're at the end of March. It's kind of difficult. Like, what was the warning system in January? Was pipeline being pushed from December to January? Was pipeline being pushed from January to February? Was pipeline not pushed, but it was not converting? There are so many, like, if we look at it after the quarter, it's hard. It's
It's
going to be
late.
hard.
It's late.
Where I'm getting with that is I think AI can be there for the math, but it can also be there to give you those warning signals and say, okay, here's what we need to do at much bigger context as a person could in terms of speed, at least. And then I think another great use case that we are exploring for planning is, can we use AI for stakeholder communication? In planning, things are happening so fast. Did I tell the recruiting team that my EMEA region is now growing by X amount more heads, and we're taking them out of the US region, for example? Did I tell them that? Maybe I did, maybe I did not. I think there's where AI can help with guided workflow of making sure you have all your boxes checked, but also making sure that it does that communication and takes a lot of that project management aspect from you.
Okay. All right. That's helpful to know. So, sensitivity analysis to stakeholder communication, you're basically trying to find out different use cases that would make the teams productive through AI. But let's say if we were to select a specific precision points, for example, or maybe let me reframe it this way, where can AI genuinely improve planning precision today? For example, forecast probability scoring or deal risk modeling or even rep capacity or forecasting. which all data points where you think AI can actually genuinely help us?
I think when it comes to forecasting and modeling, I think all of the above. I've
Mm,
personally seen success in capacity planning, attainment, and attrition sensitivity analyses, which are great inputs into the sales plan. Just when you think about attrition, right? There's the historical data that you can use, but then AI could help analyzing any external factors, or maybe it could help analyze NPS scores that you have with the company. Maybe just give you, it can scour through much more data and do a triage way of comparison, or maybe a variable base to say, what's the threshold for that metric? And that is where I think forecasting specifically, what I've seen is that forecasting is often done, I don't want to say manually, but it's informed based on opinions. And
mm-hmm.
if you have someone who has been in their segment for years and they know what they're doing. Yes, but what if you have a new team member? I think those tools could be especially powerful when you have a new sales leader taking on a segment, and they can now use to say, okay, what was historical data? What is trends to improve their forecast? And again, triangulation, I think, is where it will be very helpful to say, do I have a biased forecast,
Mm-hmm.
or do I
Mm-hmm.
have a forecast based on data? And it could be a biased data forecast too, right? Historical bias is one that we talked about. We also talked about optimism bias that could be happening. I think tools can help you to uncover that bias, but just know or remember that these AI tools have bias itself. It's created by humans. Humans have biases, so as well have the AI tools. And it's good to ask AI. Sometimes what I like to ask them is, this is what I'm thinking. How would you challenge my perspective? What are things where this could not be true? And ask them to
Mm-hmm.
inspect the opposite of what you're trying to solve for. And that will maybe give you hints on testing your own assumptions as well.
Okay. All right. So on that note, Suzanne, can you tell the audience, what skills they should learn in, or let's say sales ops leaders, right? What skills they should learn to actually enhance the benefit that they're getting from AI in this era,
Yeah.
especially with respect to planning.
Yeah, when I think of planning or any sales planner role, we are such hybrids in the sense of that we have to be very, very deep in data and
Mm-hmm.
understand complex analyses and technical tools, but we also have to be really good at communication. And I think communication, alignment, trust building, so very hard and very soft skills. And you have to be good in both of them equally to be a good sales planner. When I think
Mm-hmm.
about AI, users should be leaning into what they know is the weaker of the two. I know that my technical skills are better than my social skills. So I'm using AI a lot to help me with communication, thinking through what stakeholders could voice as concerns, because one is a natural tendency and one is where you can learn and improve. And I would
Mm-hmm.
encourage people who are starting in this using the tools for where they know they have a weakness to strengthen it.
Wow. So AI is not going to fix our math, right, operators, but you need to be wise. In fact, it will expose it. You
Yeah.
need to be wise when you are asking questions and learn the trends to improve both technical as well as, let's say, social skills, whichever you think you need more help on.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So then this brings us to our final signature closing question. If we were to strip away all the titles, tools, dashboards, where is the one operational belief, or what's the one operational belief that you have that has shaped your career the most?
Yeah, I've been part of very fast growing companies, from T-Mobile, where they lost 1 million of customers per quarter, to turning it around to gaining 1 million of customers or work per quarter. Being part of Amazon, being part of HubSpot, all very fast growing companies. And what I've seen everywhere is that growth increases complexity like threefold. And you'll have to relentlessly automate and simplify while complexity rises. If you
Mm,
don't do that, your own growth will actually stall because you're trying to work the problem and to control the operational complexities. instead of innovating and driving the business, and with that, your personal growth forward.
Oh, wow. That's very insightful and definitely worth taking note. All right. That brings us to my favorite rapid fire round. In this rapid fire round, Suzanne, basically I'll ask you questions and share your first instinct or first thought that comes to your mind. No long answers. Let's make it fun.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So, most overrated sales metric.
I think that fast hiring is one of the things that could be very bias driven. So I would say sales hiring is one of the ones that I could see being one of my, not as, maybe look at as inspecting, and probably my recruiting partners are yelling out loud at me for that. And then the second one that I can think of that is probably overrated is pipeline if it's not qualified.
Okay. All right.
Gotta have good pipeline coming in. If you just have lots of stuff coming in, but it's not worth it, we're wasting time.
Okay. Okay. Now the other way, most underrated planning variable.
The most underrated planning metric, I think, is attrition. And you heard me talk about that quite substantially.
Yes.
Because I've seen how attrition with the COVID tailwinds to now has evolved over the years. So definitely one of my favorites. And the other one is baseline PPR, only because we all know, we think what it is. But do we really know that for the 10 years across? Do we really forecast it as one line number, or want to say, these are the reps that are ramping, these are the reps that are mid-ramp, and these are the reps that are off-ramp? And I think we can dive more deeper into that.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. A number of leaders obsess over, and they shouldn't.
They need to obsess over it, but I think headcount is one that is part of my equation that I had mentioned. But we're obsessing over it in the sense of sometimes there is linear thinking of one rep equals $1, but it needs to be one rep equals $1.5.
Yeah, that's profound. I totally relate it with the discussions that we've had. So although it is part of your revenue engine equation, it can be overrated by the managers or leaders, right? Okay. All right. This could be simpler. Let's see. Spreadsheet mistake that drives you crazy.
Linking spreadsheets is very annoying to me. When it comes to mistakes, formulas. If you build formulas that are not flexible and you have to repeat them, it drives me crazy.
Okay. All right. So please don't link your spreadsheets, especially for Suzanne's reporting.
Or link them to make sure it works. I'm fine with that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Most dangerous phrase in planning meetings that you've heard of.
We hope to get there by X, Y, and Z. Hope is not a strategy. And I also know that people don't mean it like that when they say that. It's more a colloquial thing that is happening. But when I hear hope in the context of planning, kind of makes my hair stand up.
Okay. All right. Fair. It's fair. Harder to model. Is it ramp or productivity? Between the two, what's harder to model?
I think ramp is harder to model.
Okay. Metric that creates false confidence.
Historical MRR.
Okay. We started our discussion with that. All right. And the last one habit every ops leader should build, especially in next 2 to 3 years time when AI is taking over or AI is changing the way of operating.
First, how can I automate this? As much as sales teams have administrative tasks that keep them from their peak productivity, we have the same happening in the operational teams and the RevOps teams. So focus on how can we minimize the noise that is happening on those teams so that they can be at their best.
Okay, you did amazing, Suzanne. Thank you so much for all these nuggets of knowledge. This was definitely a dense conversation, but in the best way. And it was a reminder that sales planning isn't about perfect math. It's a system of assumptions, definitions, equations, trade-offs that must be continuously tested, aligned, adopted, and communicated. So thank you so much, Suzanne. It was wonderful to have you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity. And I hope that whoever's listening, that they are taking something away that helps them in their career in sales planning.
Absolutely. I think all our listeners who are currently building sales plan, they need to go back and question their assumptions, because revenue problems are rarely effort problems.
Yes.
They are math problems. And as an operators, it's our job to make the math honest. All right. Until next time, thank you so much for joining and listening to this episode. If you found this valuable, please do share it with at least one person that you think this will benefit. Thank you.
Thank you.